What is up, everyone? Brandon First, aka First Report, representing the First Off the Bench podcast network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. Welcome in to the In the Paint podcast here on the network, where we break down everything college basketball has to offer. And of course, when I say we, I mean myself and my friend and co-host Raider Jim Martinez. How are you doing? Excuse me. You can find Mr. Martinez at Raider Jim 1090. How are you doing tonight, Mr. Martinez?
Doing good, folks. This is that time of year where we have to really mind our P's and Q's because we were talking football last night. We've got a little bit of racing left at Del Mar, thoroughbred racing. Plus, we have Santa Anita coming up. And so we might be talking to you about Gonzaga basketball, and all of a sudden I start talking about a thoroughbred. And we don't mean to do that, but we're spinning a lot of plates right now, and it's a great time of year.
Amen. I was just, I'm very excited I hit that open because the entire time I was just screaming at myself, in the paint, in the paint, in the paint, just to make sure I didn't
No
flub that up,
horses, no
obviously.
horses.
It's been a little bit since we last spoke to you, at least in this context of the college basketball side of things. It was probably mid-April. Of course, wrapping a bow on a wild season and an even wilder tournament. And, looking at what we've got going on, early season, very early. Most teams have played about 2 or 3 games, and the upsets continue to fly. Again, obviously, as I mentioned, we saw one of the more improbable tournaments last year with the 16 being taken down and 3 first-time Final Four appearances for certain clubs. And then the upsets have continued to come. Other storylines as well we'll be talking about here is, Arizona. This was an interesting one. They went in and took down Duke. This wasn't a non-conference, neutral site game, even a game that, it's in Charlotte. There's going to be a lot of Duke fans, but technically it's neutral. No, this was in Cameron Indoor Stadium. Arizona, had the cojones to go to Cameron, and they paid it off. They got the win. And then another thing I kind of popped down on here is, as I call it, the Purdue Revenge Tour. I talked about a 16 seed taking down a 1 seed. Well, that was the Purdue Boilermakers. Obviously, only the second time that's ever happened. First time it happened, Virginia, the team that got knocked out as the 1 seed. The next year, they went on to win the national title. They've already beaten Xavier. But they have some big games coming up in the next month with Gonzaga, Alabama, and of course the team I just talked about, U of A. But Raider Jim, what are your thoughts? Some of the early season headlines as we kind of look ahead to the Thanksgiving holiday.
Yeah, that Wildcat game, it was like they got invited to somebody's holiday party, walked in, went up to the punch bowl, and just threw it all over the floor. Kind of ruined the whole party for those Duke people. And like any place, any hometown crowd, the Duke fans are just out of their minds. And so for that to happen this early in the season, oh my goodness, that did not leave a good taste in their mouths after the end of that game. James Madison, you have down here upsetting Michigan State. I remember last year, I think we went all the way to the end of February and even early March, and maybe even the tournament, saying, okay, Michigan State's going to make that run now. And they just never did. And they've already dropped 2 this year, if I'm not mistaken, 2 out of their first 3, which does not look good for Michigan State. And, again, there's that question in the back of your mind. How many more errors does Izzo have before he's got to start worrying about the state of that program? He's been around, so we'll wait and see. It's going to be an interesting one. Purdue, Zach Edey playing for Purdue. He's another one. He's just like, the last couple of years, it was people would stop and look at the Gonzaga lineup and go, hasn't Drew Timme been around for a while? How many more years is he going to play? And I was going to say, yeah, Zach Edey, he's the only 40-year-old guy playing right now in the NCAA. And he's not that old. He's taking advantage of what he can do. And good for him if he's got that year of eligibility left. Good for him, good for Purdue, but we'll see what that means for Gonzaga on Monday night when we get to talking about that tournament.
Yeah, and we will of course get to these quote unquote I don't know why they call them preseason tournaments because they're not preseason, but exempt tournaments, if you will, just that
Correct.
opportunity to get some more games in. And really a lot of the tournaments we're going to be talking about, obviously not the full slate of tournament games, but at least the upper echelon. Obviously, the Maui is the biggest one of all. But a lot of those tournaments, it's not going to be a backbreaker if you lose one of those games because you're going to be playing, unless it's Chaminade. With all due respect to Chaminade, that could be a really bad loss, but that I don't think is going to happen. But the
Right.
point being, even for Michigan State, I think the James Madison loss looks worse now. I think James Madison is going to be a top 7 seed, especially with this win. I think they're a really good basketball team. Michigan State also did lose. I think it's called the Champions Classic now. It's essentially the yearly tournament where it's Duke, Michigan State, Kentucky, and Kansas in a little round robin every year, which is great. And those are resume building wins, but not losses. But Michigan State, you were right. I felt like all last year it was okay. This is the time. This is the time they turn it on and get a 7 or get a 10 seed, and nobody wants to play them. But they never were able to do that. I remember the Big Ten tournament. I feel like it was the first or second round, and you're like, okay, this is it, and they just couldn't get it done against a Rutgers or a Penn State, something like that. And it does seem to be snowballing a bit for Izzo, and it seems like it's been a while since
Yeah.
Michigan State. I don't want to say is irrelevant, but is definitely not on the level that we're used to seeing them. And then one other thing, I was very impressed, and I'll put my hand up. College basketball, despite Raider Jim's warnings, pretty much, and his final thoughts the last month, saying, "Hey, college basketball is right around the corner." This snuck up on me. Even last week when it's like, okay, time to start thinking about college basketball. Let's see how San Diego State's going to do. Oh, they've already lost to BYU. And we'll get to that here in a minute. But it did sneak up on me, and I was able to watch the Kentucky Kansas game till about 10 minutes left. I had to unfortunately go to sleep, but I was very impressed with what I think Kansas is going to be able to put together. We've seen a lot of upsets, but I think Kansas is that team, obviously bringing in maybe the biggest the biggest transfer of them all in Hunter Dickinson. Of course, he was
Oh,
at
yeah.
Michigan the last few years, and I think he had 23 and 21. Don't quote me on that, but it was a
Correct. That is
ridiculous. Okay. Against a Kentucky team. We're not talking about, a cupcake early on or a preseason, game behind closed doors. I was against Kentucky. So I look at Kansas right now, and it's so early. I shouldn't even be saying this, but Kansas, I think, is the out and out favorite. And I do say that also considering they didn't look very good sometimes against Kentucky. I think they had to come back from at least 8, maybe it got up to 10 to get that W, but they did. And they are the preseason #1 for good reason. And I do think that's a great little lead in to our player spotlight. I always, put the player spotlight in, and last year it was kind of focusing on the Drew Timmies and the Zach Eddies and the big name guys. But this year I wanted to kind of find some players that look. This is a name that you're going to be hearing, but he's not going to light the scoreboard up. But I think he may be one of the best passers in college basketball, and definitely one of the best defenders. I'm talking about Dajuan Harris Jr. He's a guard at Kansas, of course. That's why the lead-in works so well. And I think the best part about what Dajuan brings to the table, he is what I think NBA folks refer to as a 3-and-D. This guy's going to knock down threes, and he's going to play really solid defense, and that's what he did last year. Already averaging 7 assists this year. Steal numbers aren't where they need to be, but shooting over 60% from behind the arc. Small sample size, but you go back to his freshman year, he did shoot over 60% that year as well when he was averaging 16 minutes a game. So this is a guy that, once again, he's not going to be at the top of your points and rebound stat sheet, but he is going to fill up the stat sheet with the steals and the assists, I believe, which I think is a perfect complement for what Kansas has going forward. But Raider Jim, what are your thoughts on our player spotlight, Dajuan Harris?
Yeah, nice way to start out of the gate with this kid, Dajuan Harris. He's guard, as you already alluded to, out of Rockbridge High in Columbia, Missouri. Like many of these blue chip kids that are playing D1 basketball, he played on a winner in high school. He's transferred that over to his college career. Played for the 2018 state runner-up champions in Columbia, Missouri, and in 2019 led that team to the state championship. Was also a starter on the 2022 Kansas National Championship team. So this kid's got it, and he was in it last year. One of the things I like is, even though he isn't the big point guy, he doesn't put up all the points as you alluded to, but he's a hell of a defender, and he's been recognized by NCAA by his Division IV defensive play. I think the NBA's got him tagged 4. This is a defensive kid. But what I like was, after that game the other night, the way he put the way he surmised the game between Kansas and Kentucky was, that was big boy basketball. And that was a compliment to both his opponent and his own team. And then he also made the statement, something to the effect, they dared me to beat them. And so, and he took it upon himself. So what I like about that is, it's not so much a cockiness as it is a confidence. And there's a, there is a line there. You have to have a little bit of both. But he seems like a very good, well-rounded kid. The only thing I would hold against him going into the draft is 6'2", 170. Boy, he's going to get pushed around. You're still seeing that with the former Zag, Chet Holmgren, who's having a fine time in the NBA now that he's past his injury, et cetera. But even still, he's got some of them bigs out there saying, this kid's good, but man, you got to put some weight on. And they keep trying to shove, Big Macs and things down him to see if he can gain weight. So if Harris can, add on another 15 pounds or so and maintain his speed and maintain his reflexes, boy, he's going to be a force.
And I have down his year is a junior, but I also know his name is Dajuan Harris Jr.
He is junior, yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure I didn't mix that up and see that. So, at least one more year of eligibility to probably bolster that. And that is always the question when we do these player spotlights, how do they project to the NBA? I'm not very good at that. I mean, I don't watch a lot of, I don't watch any NBA. I'll be honest with you. It's not a type of basketball I like to enjoy. And a lot of the reason why is because a guy like Dajuan Harris, I hate to say it, but if he wasn't a good 3-point shooter, I don't think NBA teams would have any interest in it, because if the main thing you bring to the table on the defensive or on the basketball side is the defense, there are a lot of teams that we'll win 130 to 125. Right. And or at the very least, they're not going to waste the top draft pick on a guy like that. I think the days of the Shane Battier's kind of being top draft picks, and I think that was a big reason why Jimmy Butler was so appreciated for a while. But I think this Dajuan Harris kid, he is going to be putting himself in I should say, other teams are going to put him in that situation. As you alluded to, they dared me to beat me, and I did. If you're able to force someone besides Hunter Dickinson to beat you on Kansas, that's what you have to do. And that's why I think Dajuan Harris, look, if this is your kind of, I don't want to say backup plan, because I don't even think he's the number 2 option offensively for Kansas. But if this is a kid who at the end of the game has the ball in his hands and he's got to chuck it up from behind the arc, I think that's what you're going to be looking for. And on the other side of it, on the defense, I've put a lot of emphasis on defending without fouling, especially at the college level. And that's what this kid does. I think it frustrates college kids and it forces them into bad situations where they think they're getting fouled. And who knows, maybe they are, but it's not getting called. That builds. I think it makes it easier for defenders like Dajuan Harris to kind of take over and get into the head a little bit. And then of course, he's got plenty of other options offensively. But I think top to bottom, Kansas is really good. And once again, I do realize it's November 16th. So a lot of basketball to be played. But if there are no more final thoughts on Dajuan Harris, Raider Jim, give us your thoughts on the Gonzaga Bulldogs.
Oh, the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Here we go. Well, I'll tell you, nothing but respect between the top 2 teams in the West Coast Conference, and that is the Gonzaga Bulldogs and, of course, the St. Mary's Gales, and led by Randy Bennett. Coaches Few and Bennett are just class act. And I will tell you, The West Coast Conference this season is looking a little bit different because BYU has moved out and they've gone on. I believe it was to the Big 12 they've gone,
Yes,
which
they
is
are.
kind of interesting because that's a lot of frequent flyer miles these kids are going to be putting on. But hopefully they get a little bit of that from the program. So BYU is not going to be a factor in this one. Early season, just from within the West Coast Conference, it is St. Mary's is the #1 team, and they are strong. They're going to be very strong. And then it's Gonzaga's #2 after that. You've got San Francisco Dons, and then after that it's Loyola Marymount, and then you fill in the rest with the Santa Clara Pacific and our own USD Toreros here in San Diego. But what happened with Gonzaga during the offseason? The big thing is Drew Timme finally decided, even though he could have come back one more year of eligibility, and he decided, no, it's time for me to move on and let these other guys get in there and get their minutes. So along with Drew Timme, they lost 6 other players, which equate to 7 of the top 10 minute earners, if you will, on the floor for Gonzaga last year are not there. They're gone. That's a big void. However, they filled in, as Gonzaga does, very, very well. Returning senior, and he's going to be the leader on the court. He's the leader of the team, forward Anton Watson. And more than one time last year, I said Anton Watson, only way to put it is he plays like a grown-ass man. And he does. And he's going to come back even more mature. He realizes it's all on his shoulders, if you will. He is the leader. He's the one with all the floor experience. So he will be out there. We have another familiar name. Now, last year and the year before, Anton had a running mate on the floor, Andrew Nembhard. Andrew Nembhard has moved on. However, at the end of last year, his younger brother, Ryan from Creighton, decided to go into the transfer portal. So you will still see the name Nembhard on the back of one of the Gonzaga jerseys. You're also going to see they filled in, they've got one real good redshirt freshman, Brandon Huff, 6'10". This kid was the hot shot of Illinois high school basketball. Hardest decision for him to make so far in his early career, was to sit out and take that red shirt last year, that red shirt year. He is already saying, smartest thing I ever did is to take that year, sit back, and as hard as it was for him to watch some of what was going on the floor, he has been very vocal that I have learned so much from that, and he's already come out and he is just throwing points in on limited play. He's not playing full games, but I think he hit 20 points both of his games already. So you can't look away from that. Other transfer portal news was out of the University of Wyoming in the old Mountain West Conference, and probably the Aztecs were glad to see him go. A young man named Graham Ike, 6'9", 240-pound forward. That's some body on the inside. Between Brandon Huff at 6'10", Graham Ike at 6'9", 240, and Anton Watson, who's also coming in at 6'9" and very, very solid, very, very strong. They do have 3 bodies where they could double team a Zach Edey come Monday night out there in Hawaii. We'll see how that plays out. And then internationally, once again, Gonzaga does their thing. They've got Jun Suk Yo out of South Korea. They've got Croatia's Luka Krajnovic, and out of Serbia, they have Pavle Stosic. Gonzaga always hitting the European and the Asian camps very, very hard. This is not going to be a Gonzaga team that is going to roll over and die for anybody. I like that they are started out at 11. After their first 2 games, they're still at 11 in the top 25. I think that's better than the last few years where they have started out 1 or 2, and they do this, ridiculous string of winning 28 straight, where week in and week out, everybody is waiting to see, when are you going to lose? When are you going to lose? And, you've got the target on your back. They don't have the target on their back this year. They're using that horse race vernacular. They're in the middle of the pack in a 25-horse race, and that's not a bad place to be. So I think Gonzaga is going to look pretty good throughout the season. The Maui tournament, if they can come out of there with 2 wins, that's going to be a lot said.
Yeah, it's definitely a little different. Obviously, you said Drew Timme not there anymore, but that Raider Jim is a Gonzaga fan when he has all that experience pronouncing some of those names. I tell you what, the those three, that was 3 for 3. Not like I would be able to correct you or anything, but they sounded correct, and you delivered them with a ton of confidence. But yeah, I feel like that's always, was Ronnie Turioff international, or was
France.
he maybe? Sorry, okay, yeah, that's what I figured. But it just seems like they've, and there have been plenty of other, Gonzaga Bulldogs that don't jump out to me right this minute. But they've always had a fingerprint in the international side. And I think that's, the reason why they became, where they are now. And the reason why the international scene is hit, obviously, probably a lot harder than it was in the 90s. Obviously, the level of play has jumped up as well internationally, but it's definitely not kind of out of the ordinary to go get a 5-star kid at a Europe, or, as you said, out of Asia. So very interesting stuff here. Of course, let's see, I think it was December. Let's see. Yeah, December 29th. Both myself and Raider Jim will be glued to the TV. San Diego State will head up to Spokane into the kennel to face Gonzaga. Of course, I'll be covering the San Diego State side of it. And what an offseason it was for San Diego State. Mainly it was the season. Last year, a historic run all the way to the national title game. And yeah, maybe they got a little lucky with some of their draws, but at the same time, they did beat the #1 overall team in the tournament. And, they got what was done when it was needed. And I don't think anybody really scared UConn in the tournament. But if I remember correctly, there were about 5 or 6 minutes left in that game, and San Diego State went on a run to get it down to about 6. UConn called a timeout. UConn ended up kind of going on a run to put it away, but San Diego State was really the only one to kind of punt back against UConn last year in the tournament. The Huskies, of course, were so dominant en route to another national title, but for San Diego State, it's now about building on it. And a big reason why San Diego State made their run last year, no doubt about it, it was kind of the super seniors, the COVID seniors that had opportunities to stay for, 4, 5, 6 years. And I think something even Drew Timme would have taken advantage of that. If he came back, it would have been kind of that extra bonus year because you were in school during COVID. Unfortunately, that senior staff has essentially moved on. But outside of a loss to BYU, San Diego State has looked really good. And I understand it's against Fullerton and Long Beach State, but they're putting up 83 and 88 points. And the thing that jumps out to me is Jaden Ledee, 27, 21, 27, including a 10 rebound and an 11 rebound game in those wins against Fullerton and Long Beach State. So I think Jaden Ledee is going to be that offensive, spark plug, two-way player, something that Aztecs really haven't had. And I don't know. I'm not really going to put Kawhi in that big man conversation, but I'm thinking of, a Marcus Slaughter, a bigger 6'9" plus forward who can, rebound and score the basketball. It's been a little while since San Diego State had a player like that. Does seem like Jaden Ledee could fit that bill. But as I said, Aztecs currently are 2-1. They are going to be facing St. Mary's tomorrow. We are recording on Thursday the 16th, so it'll be the 17th of November. And that will be the Continental Tire main event. That'll be happening in Vegas. San Diego State will face St. Mary's. And then on the other side of the bracket, it will be Washington and Xavier. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. But for San Diego State, looking ahead, St. Mary's is the next test for the Aztecs. They have plenty of tests going forward. Not to mention as well, in about 8 days, they will face Cal as well. That game will be played in a neutral site. A bunch of cupcakes after that, with all due respect to the Point Loma Nazarene, the UCSDs, and the Grand Canyons of the world. But as I said, late December, SDSU will be facing Stanford at home. That's an interesting one. It's been a while since we've seen a Pac-12 school have the guts to come to Viejas Arena. And then, as I mentioned, that game at Gonzaga. I just have the ESPN schedule up for San Diego State. And on the right side, like all good marketing teams do, they have a link for tickets. and it says at Gonzaga, tickets as low as $762. What a deal. But no, that will be a really, really good game. But I think that also just goes to show how tough I think it is to get a ticket into the Kennel. Really, probably no matter who they're playing, San Diego State does add a little to it, but goodness gracious, $762 for that one. So
the hard fast rule back, some 20 years ago, the hard fast rule was I had actually talked to somebody who went up there, and they said they were just blown away because they went to Spokane to see a game, and they kept asking around, where can I get tickets? Where can I get tickets? And then somebody finally sat them down and said, you don't understand. Nobody sells their tickets up here. This is our sports team. We have the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and that's it. So yeah, that is now I'm sure that these days everybody's got a price, it seems.
Yeah,
so $762. I can buy a lot of pizza and beer and watch it at home.
Amen. Fight the traffic, or not have to fight the traffic and all that stuff. Not have to deal with some, drunk college kids, this or that. But you're right. It is here in San Diego. Look, there's a lot of stuff to do on a November Friday night. Not to say there isn't. I'm sure Spokane is a beautiful city. And I've actually heard it is a beautiful city now that I think about it. But yeah, that is the only show in town for them. And they obviously take a huge amount of pride, as they should, in their Gonzaga Bulldogs. But yeah, that is, looking ahead for San Diego State. But outside of this tournament right here, and then when they get going against Cal in that situation as well, it's going to be, a lot of St. Catherine's, a UC Irvine's, things like that, just to kind of pad those numbers. And then the Gonzaga game will be the final game before the Mountain West season begins. San Diego State was picked to win the Mountain West, but I just kind of feel like that might be a little bit of a hangover after last season. A lot of people have a really good taste, as they should, for San Diego State. But I think a tournament appearance is the goal for this team. If you expect this team to get back to the national championship, you need to reassess things. And that's not a knock on San Diego State. I'm just worried that the expectations were brought up so much by people that don't really follow college basketball. They're going to think this is now a yearly thing. Not going to be the case. So
no, and they started out the season number 17 on the AP 25, and it only took the one loss to knock them out. And my concern now with that is, and pardon me as I stepped away if you mentioned this, I'm very, very, I will be dialed into tomorrow night's game.
Yes.
Going into Moraga and playing against that strong St. Mary's team. They got a kid in the middle that's, I think 6'10", 245, 250, something like that. And he is a beast. They got a couple kids from Australia. That's Randy Bennett's areas. He loves to target those kids out of Australia. He had Davalio a few years back, who was just a little monster guard, just an annoyance for the Gonzaga Bulldogs each time they played. So that's going to be interesting to see how well SDSU responds to the Gonzaga, or to the St. Mary's crowd and the environment up there at
that'll actually be in Vegas. That'll be in Vegas.
Oh, it's a tournament?
It's a tournament. Yeah, it's the Continental Tire main event.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah, that game will be in Vegas. But San Diego State has gone up to St. Mary's in the past, and it's been fantastic. It is, when you were talking about the West Coast Conference, obviously BYU, losing BYU, that's tough. But I don't think it changes the top. I mean, it's always been St. Mary's and Gonzaga at the top. And like I said, maybe BYU might have wedged their way in there 1 or 2 years. But St. Mary's is, I think, outside of San Diego State in terms of the not Power 5 schools, the top California clubs. And it's kind of like the mid-major California championship, if you will. But it is going to be tough. And now that you think about it, Patty Mills, I think, was out of Australia as well. So Randy Bennett, I think,
another one.
He's like an honorary. I mean, I think when he's done coaching at St. Mary's, he could just be the Australia national team coach. He's going to essentially have coached every single one of them in college anyway. So that could be something going forward. But final topic we'll be talking about here on this episode, it's some of the top tournaments coming up. Obviously, I'm talking mainly pretty much from now until Thanksgiving. We won't be recording next week. Obviously, we do record on Thursdays. We'll be enjoying our turkey, as you all should as well, with your families. So we will be back in 2 weeks. But some of the top upcoming tournaments, as we mentioned, the Continental Tire main event. That'll be going on through the 17th through the 19th in Vegas. Includes, of course, San Diego State, St. Mary's, Washington, and Xavier. The Empire Classic, it's going to be in New York, the 19th and 20th. UConn, Indiana, Texas, and Louisville. Oh, good luck to Louisville in that one. It's that those three teams, really good teams, and then Louisville. But I think the big one of all, and maybe the one with the most interesting story, I think this year is the Maui Invitational. It'll be going on through the 20th through the 22nd. It's going to include Chaminade, as always, Tennessee, Syracuse, Gonzaga, Kansas, Purdue, UCLA, and Marquette. You could make a case for six. These could, 6 of these teams could be Sweet 16, maybe Elite 8 teams going forward. But the reason I do bring up kind of the story, this game obviously will not be played at its usual Lahaina Event Center. Yeah. It will be in Honolulu. Obviously, the devastating wildfires of this summer in Maui have forced the move. However, I am glad that it's still going on, mainly because, look, Hawaii relies so much on tourism, and to get some of these, some of these schools, Kansas always travels well. UCLA travels well. Syracuse, there are Syracuse people in the woodwork everywhere. And Tennessee, of course. So I think it's great to, kind of bring that into the community. I hope there's some tie-in with some sort of foundation. Don't quote me on it. I hope that's the case. It's almost kind of obvious. But I do hope that somehow some of that money gets to the Maui relief. But that is the Maui Invitational, definitely the top tier of all these tournaments. Some other ones, the Fort Myers tip-off. It'll be the 20th through the 22nd in Fort Myers, Florida, Wisconsin, Virginia, West Virginia, and SMU. The Battle for Atlantis, which is always a weird one. The court is always really weird. The Battle for Atlantis, it's like dark. It looks like they're playing in front of nobody. But anyways, that'll be in the Bahamas, the 22nd through the 24th. Really good cast here. Arkansas, Memphis, Michigan, North Carolina, Northern Iowa, Stanford, Texas Tech, and my personal favorite, Villanova. And then the preseason the NIT season tip-off. I said preseason NIT because that used to be a big tournament, but now it's just the NIT season tip-off. Only 4 teams that'll be going on in Brooklyn, Baylor, Oregon State, Florida, and Pitt. And the reason I threw this one in, this is the first time I've seen this, and obviously something that's very close to both myself and Raider Jim here in San Diego. It is the Radies Children's Invitational. Of course, our children's hospital. It's the Radies Children's Hospital here. My nephew spent some time there, so I always have a nice warm, soft spot in my heart for Radies children. That'll be going on here in San Diego from the 23rd through the 24th. Iowa, Oklahoma, Seton Hall, and USC.
And for the inaugural event, which this is, hats off to them to pull in 4 programs like that. Yes. I mean, USC is currently at I think they're at number 16 or thereabouts in the top 25. And then Seton Hall, always a competitor, Iowa, Oklahoma. I mean, really, I tip my cap to those guys. And I think that this is going to be just the beginning. I know when this first got announced last year, one of my comments was maybe they can pull something like the Chaminade deal where, Chaminade always gets to play in the Maui Invitational. Well, maybe they can have the UCSD team be like the host team that gets to go in and play somebody. Add one more team, you'll get a lot of takers that want to come out to San Diego and play.
And I think it really just goes to show, I mean, Seton Hall, that's Jersey. Iowa, everyone knows where Iowa is. Oklahoma, not so much. And obviously USC, not it. Yeah, that's just a bus ride down the 5. But yeah, this will be played at UCSD. And I think that would be great. I mean, San Diego State plays UCSD every year, and obviously I think UCSD has made the move to number 1 or to Division 1, I should say.
Yes.
Okay, but they were a D2 powerhouse. They were a Final Four contender in that level for quite a long time. So I really do agree with you. At the very least, it could, build up some exposure for some of those kids. But obviously for me, overall, the Maui Invitational is absolutely stacked. It's always stacked, but I feel like this year is more so. We are
This
seeing top to bottom the best, and with all due respect to Chaminade, they're a D2 school, so take them out of it. But the other seven
opening,
teams, you could make a case for any one of them.
yeah, I mean, there's 4 games to start it out. If there's 8 teams, 4 top 10 teams. You got number 7 Tennessee, and the next game is going to be number 11 Gonzaga against number 2 Purdue. Game 3 is going to be number 1 Kansas against the host team Chaminade, and then you've got this year's. They're back, folks. Watch out, Marquette, who's currently at number 4, taking on UCLA, who are probably 1 or 2 wins away, or somebody's 1 or 2 losses away from breaking the top 25. So yeah, this is a loaded field. Like I say, whoever walks away with the trophy for this tournament, that's a resume builder.
Definitely. And the other part of this, now once again, taking Chaminade out of this, you're not having any bad losses at these tournaments. And maybe Louisville, I think maybe if UConn loses to Louisville, I don't think Louisville's a very good team. But none of these tournaments, if you take a loss to Pitt, if you take a loss to Florida, it's not going to be the reason you miss the tournament. So I really do like the fact that these teams have kind of, get out of your comfort zone. And for a lot of these teams, it turns into kind of a team bonding experience because you're not in the dorms. You're not, okay, practice is over. Everyone go their separate ways. Practice is over. We're going to go to dinner. We're going to go here, and you're kind of together and all that stuff. And I think that builds for what's going to be needed because it's going to go by very quick. I think that's the one thing NFL flies by, but NFL is always right in front of my face. College basketball, it seems like, is never right in front of my face and I'm fully focused on it until February, mid-February now, just because football is such that, focus driven. And I know on Sunday at 10 a.m., these are the teams that are going to play. But this season is a long season. It's obviously 4 months, 5 months, and you got to deal with a lot of adversity. I think these kind of abilities to bond with your teams, this is where you figure out the glue guys, the guys who kind of accept their roles, the guys like DeJuan Harris, who, as you said, was a top prospect coming out, won everywhere he went. Now he's got to maybe take a backseat offensively to some guys. Not everyone is able to do that. And these are the moments where you kind of figure out who those guys are, because once again, it's the team that needs to be number one if you want to win the national title. But definitely keep an eye on the Maui Invitational. The Radies Children's Invitational, would love to go to that, but schedule and finances aren't going to let that happen. But I'm excited. I'm a USC fan. I've always said, look, USC is a football school, so yeah, I'll cheer for USC basketball, but I don't live and die with them. But this is definitely a team, might be one of the best since we've seen, the OJ Mayo go all the way back then. I think they made the Sweet 16, maybe the Elite Eight. But it's been a while since we've seen USC in, kind of talked about as Pac-12 favorites. So that'll be interesting. And they're going to be up against it. Iowa's a good team, and obviously Seton Hall out there in the Big East, kind of those bruisers rolling through. But any other thoughts here on the tournaments, or any final thoughts for this episode of the In the Paint podcast?
Well, I'll tell you, that USC team, as you talk about them, when was the last time we looked at the top 25 to start the season and you saw only USC, but you did not see UCLA? You see, right now you've got Pac-12, you've got Colorado, USC, and there may be one other. No, I don't think there is another one in there. And that being the case, wow, who'd have thought that was going to be it? No, it is Colorado. That's it. Colorado's the other team that I had in there. Arizona, excuse me. So Arizona's in there as well. So those are your 3 from the Pac-12, and minus UCLA. That's just, wow, you don't see that often. And then if I'm not mistaken, you're right. We've got our calendar circled for December 29, when the Aztecs will travel up to Spokane, Washington. But I think on the 16th of December, the Trojans are taking on Gonzaga. So that'll be 2 times we're going to have to be on the other sides of the court, just doing this to one another like, hey, somebody's got to win. It's going to be fun, though. looking forward to it. Check with me in about 18 weeks. Anybody who's listening to that, in 18 weeks, I'm going to tell you who the best two teams in the country are. And prior to that, I wouldn't even guess. This is, we do talk thoroughbred racing on a regular basis, and we just got done covering the Breeders' Cup, the North American, championships, if you will, international, all kinds of thoroughbreds participating. And to get there, it's a long journey. And in a matter of 2 minutes, some horse out of nowhere that is not the favorite, it's a filler in the race at 30-1, wins the race. Kind of like tears up everybody's tickets. That is March Madness. I mean, you can be at number one all year long, but if you lose your conference tournament, that ruins your seed. And then you get into that tournament, one hiccup, one strain of the flu going through your locker room, and all of a sudden you got some 16 seed playing in the Final Four. That's why you got to love college basketball.
Why they call it the madness, and that's why I think all of us love this sport so much. As I said, I people ask me, do you watch basketball? And I have to ask what type of basketball, because I don't think the NBA is playing the same brand of basketball, which may be a negative. There were a lot of, there was a bit of talk last year that, the college players, they're just not good or this or that. Well, no, they're just playing with fundamentals. And they're not, playing ISO every single, they're using motion, they're running pick and rolls and things like that. And we have people who play defense, and we have teams like San Diego State that, have no problem beating you 55-52. And that's why I love this sport so much. But it all culminates, of course, in March, and I'll be right there with you, Raider Jim. 18 weeks, I feel like I will have a pretty good hold on what we have going forward. But that is all we have for you for this episode of the original. Oh, I knew it was going to happen, for the In the Paint podcast network, presented by In the Paint, presented by the First Off the Bench podcast network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. It's time for y'all to go wash your hands, and please stop hating everybody. We'll talk to y'all very soon. Take care.